Hello everybody, we are back with more Neverhood 1 Chronicles, and we are still in the midst of reading the Hall of Records. So let us continue to do so. Excuse me. And they left the city unguarded and pursued Blue Yents. Then Homan said to Hema, "Stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward White Yent east, for I will give it into your hand." So Hema stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. And the men in ambush rose quickly from their place, and when he stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and captured it. And they quickly set the city on fire. When the men of White Yent east turned back and looked, behold, the smoke of the city ascended to the sky. And they had no place to flee, this way or that, for the people who had been fleeing to the wilderness turned against the pursuers. When Hema and all the Blue Yents saw that the men in ambush had captured the city, and that the smoke of the city ascended, they turned back and slew the men of White Yent east. And the others came out from their city to encounter them, so that they were trapped in the midst of Blue Yents, some on this side and some on that side. And they slew them until no one was left of those who survived or escaped. But they took alive the king of White Yent east and brought him to Hema. Now it came about when the Blue Yents had finished killing all the inhabitants. Mass destruction of White Yents east in the field and the wilderness where they pursued them. And all of them were fallen by the spear until they were destroyed. Then all the Blue Yents returned to White Yent east and struck it with the spear. And all who fell that day, both male and female, were 12,000. All the people of White Yent east. For Hema did not withdraw his hand, with which he stretched out the spear until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of White Yent east. So Hema burned White Yent east and made it a heap forever, a desolation until this day. And he hanged the king of White Yent east on a tree until evening and at sunset. Hema gave a command, and they took his body down from the tree and threw it at the entrance of the city gate and raised over it a great heap of stones that stands to this day. So Ichigoplasti and all the White Yents who were with him arose by night and lay in wait against Blue Yent south in 4 companies. Now Pimento Lufa, the son of Textadril, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate and said, Who is Ichigoplasti that we should serve him? And Ichigoplasti and the White Yents were with him arose from the ambush, and when Pimento Lufa takes up a drink. Of the Blue Yents saw the White Yents, he said to Factotron. Okay. Look, Yents are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Factotron said to him, You are seeing the shadow of the mountains as if they were Yents. And Pimento Lufa spoke again and said, Behold, Yents are coming down from the highest part of the land, and one company comes by the way of the Diviner's Sandwich. Then Factotron said to him, Where is your boasting now with which you said, Who is Ichigoplasti, that we should serve him? Are these not the White Yents whom you despised? Go out now and fight with them. So Pimento Lufa went out before the leaders of Blue Yent South and fought with Ichigoplasti, and Ichigoplasti chased him. And he fled before him, and many fell wounded and at the entrance of the gate. Then Ichigoplasti remained at Blue Yent West. But Factotron drove from Pimento Lufa and his relatives so that they could not remain in Blue Yent South. Now it came about the next day that Blue Yents went out to the field, and it was told to Ichigoplasty. So he took his white Yents and divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. When he looked and saw the Yents coming out from the city, he arose against them and slew them. The Ichigoplasty and the company who was with him dashed forward and stood in the entrance of the city. I gotta look up this word. This word is just killing me here. I gotta look this up. I gotta Google and just see what I get. It's probably gonna correct how it's spelled. Ichigoplasty. Plasty. What does that mean? What is it? Yeah, it's actually given me a link to the Neverhood. Ichigoplasty with white Yents fought against the blue Yents. He rose by night and lay in wait against blue Yents south in 4 companies. We are learning this. And then you just get various links to, doctors that do plastic surgery. Everything else is Neverhood related here. Yeah, that's funny. Okay. Then Ichigoplasty and the company who was with him dashed forward and stood in the entrance of the city gate. The other 2 companies then dashed against all who were in the field and slew them. Ichigoplasty fought against the city all that day, and he captured the city and killed the blue Yents who were in it. Then he razed the city and sowed it with the salt, razing by setting it on fire. When all the leaders of the Tower of Blue Yent South heard of it, they entered the inner chamber of the Temple of Hallmark, or the Door, and it was told to Ichigoplasty that all the leaders of the Tower of Blue Yent South were gathered together. So Ichigoplasty went up to Mount Chloricynti, he and all the Yents who were with him, and Ichigoplasty took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees and lifted it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the Yents who were with him, What you have seen me do, hurry and do likewise. And all the Yents also cut down each one his branch and followed Ichigoplasty, and put them on the inner chamber and set the inner chamber on fire over those inside, so that all the men of the Tower of Blue Yent South also died, about 1,000 men and women. Damn. You could turn this into a frickin' role-playing game. Like, legit. Then Ichigoplasty went to Blue Yeti southwest, and he camped against Blue Yeti southeast or southwest and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the center of the city, and all the men and women with all the leaders of the city fled there and shut themselves in. And they went up on the roof of the tower. So Ichigoplasty came to the tower and fought against it, and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain female Yent threw 16-ton weight on Ichigoplasty's head, crushing his skull. Then he called quickly to a young Yent, his armor bearer, and said to him, Draw your spear and kill me, lest it be said of me, a female Yent slew him. So he didn't want to be known for being killed by a female Yent. So the young Yent pierced him through, and he died. And when the white Yents saw that Ichigoplasty was dead, each departed to his home. When the blue Yents and the white Yents started to fight, so did Pinto, Bunyan, and Holpen. Quarter stepped in and took Pinto Bunyan's crown away and gave it to a new being he made called Arvin. Good stuff. Here's a little bro here. Backtrack here a moment. Sometimes he does stop, but he is supposed to keep walking. Homan. So this must be Homan that we're looking at here. When you are doing this, though, you can just keep spamming the left click. He'll keep going. Sometimes he'll just keep going on his own. Take a sip of drink. So yeah, I think this is the Homan character. Make a save. Okay, next screen. Okay, we're at a guy here called Hoborg. Quarter wanted to see what would happen if he made a creative being with a big heart. Quarter named him Hoborg, meaning big heart. Hoborg was given a crown, and he set out into a void of clouds as Quarter watched him from a distance. Hoborg liked the idea of making a place for some beings of his own. He knew that the clouds that swirled around him would make a perfect sky, so he just needed to make some land. One thing that concerned Hoborg was that perhaps some of his beings would have come out bad. He wanted to make beings which he could enjoy forever. But he did not want to force them to love and respect him. He decided that he would make his beings with the ability to choose right and wrong. Working everything out in his head, he figured he could make one child at a time and see if he turned out good before he started out on the next one. Hoborg made a tiny scale model of his world in clay, K-L-A-Y, or clay, C-L-A-Y, which is the proper word for clay, to see if it looked the way he had imagined it. He spent about 20 years designing the shapes and colors of this place, which he would call the Overhood. He needed some clay to make his world, and the only place where clay could be found that was of the purity and quality Hoborg wanted would take 400 years to reach. Okay. He was so anxious to get started, he asked for help from Quarter. Quarter, thank you for making me with such a fine crown. Everything is in life is just wonderful, but I was wondering. Hoborg got down on one knee. Can you help get me to the clay? Help get me to the clay of highest quality. Quarter laughed. That would take even me a long time to reach. What's wrong with the clay that I have already given you? Hoborg answered, I like the clay you gave me for planning things, but I was hoping for the best ingredients for my beings. You see, I want them to last forever, and clay only lasts for a few thousand years. Okay. Quarter was impressed. Here is a scope that will help you see as far as you need to. You will be able to pick the shortest path to the clay, which should save you quite a few years of travel. You will only be able to pick the shortest path. Okay. Hoborg received the scope. Oh, thank you, Quarter. You are very generous. Hoborg started on his journey that same day. Looking through the scope, he could clearly see the mountain of clay he needed to build the Overhood. Every day was the same. Hoborg woke before sunrise so that he could travel far without heat. But before he set off to travel each morning, he thought lofty. Take a sip of drink. I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing me say that. This is probably the largest amount of text, maybe that I've read probably in any game so far. And definitely on my channel so far. Respectful thoughts about Quarter. Hoborg is in his ever so deep voice. Would sing songs to the ground about how good it was to have been made. After a morning's journey, Horborg would cover himself up in soil and rest. He resumed his mission in the afternoon and walked toward the great mountain of clay until late in the evening. After 20 years of travel, Horborg grew very lonely. Soon he could not stand to go on. He found a chunk of land upon which he could stop and rest. It had one spindly vine growing on it, and Horborg lay down beside it to enjoy the shade it provided so he might be delivered from his discomfort. And Horborg was extremely happy about the plant. But at dawn the next day, a worm came and attacked the plant, and it withered. And it came about when the sun came up that a scorching east wind and the white light of the sun beat down on Horborg's head, so that he became faint and begged to die, saying, "Death is better to me than life." Horborg could not get himself to do anything. He just lay there. Horborg began to scrap absent-mindedly at the dirt, scrape at the dirt where his hand lay. Then he said, "Scraping is better to me than death." It was a fine, dry dirt that was packed down and baked hard by the white sun. His fingers bent, lifted, and stretched. Bent, lifted, and stretched. Bent, lifted, and stretched, scratching relentlessly. His fingers scraped through the layers of fine dust and grit day after day. Just a few grains of dust and grit required weeks of scraping before it broke loose from the ground. The ground was that hard and compacted. More and more dirt added to the pile under his palm each month. During the years that passed, the only sounds he heard were the scraping of his hands on the dirt and his breathing. After a pile big enough to pick up formed underneath his hand, he grabbed it, spat on it, and squeezed it, and squeezed it, and squeezed it until his hand turned white and his knuckles made popping sounds. Horborg sat up and looked at what lay in his palm. As he opened his fist, he saw that he had formed a clod of dirt. Now the worm that had attacked the spindly vine had caused it to wither, popped his head out of the ground and admired the clod, saying, "My, what a nice clod of dirt you've got there." Looking Horborg up and down, it asked, "Did you make that all day by yourself?" "Yes, I did," said Horborg. "If I were you," said the worm, "I'd stay right here and make more dirt clods. You could fashion them into beings and populate this chunk of land with them." Yes. After all, did you really see a pile of clay through the scope Quarter gave you, or did you just want to see it because Quarter said you would be able to see it? Horborg answered, "Actually, Quarter said the scope would enable me to see the shortest path to the clay, and because of that, I should save quite a few years of travel. But I've been traveling for so long." And the worm said to Horborg, "You haven't saved any time in your journey. You haven't ever seen clay, have you?" I wonder if Quarter has ever seen clay. When Horborg thought of it that way, he also began to wonder, were there even such a thing as clay? He had only heard about it. He'd never seen any. Then a thought occurred to Horborg. Sure, it had taken many years to collect enough dirt to make this one clod, but he had plenty of time, and he knew there were plenty of dirt right here. He did not have to keep searching for clay, or he could continue his journey, not even knowing when or if he would reach his goal. He considered making more dirt clods, creating clod beings right there to populate the the chunk of land he had stopped on to rest. Sure, it would take a lot of spit, but Horborg figured he would find a way to work up enough. And now that he had a purpose for scraping, he could use both hands and save time. First, he would finish creating a being from the dirt clod he already had. Horborg knelt beside the thing he put together. The hideous outrage of dirt stretched out, and then as he worked the clod with his hands, it began to show signs of life. Stirred with an unease, half vital motion. So it's a dirt ball zombie. Frightful it must have been, for supremely frightful was the effect. His endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of his own creator quarter. His successor terrified Horborg. He cast away his odious handiwork, horror-stricken as far and with as much velocity as he could throw. It. He hoped that, left to itself out wherever it might land, the slightest spark of life which had received such imperfect animation would subside into dead matter. Horborg went to sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would clench forever the transient existence of the hideous clod which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He slept but in a dream. He was awakened. He opened his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing standing at his side under the splendidly vine. In Horborg's dream, it grew back, and it looked on him with yellow, spit oozing but speculative eyes. Horborg woke for real and was horror-stricken, because he saw something far away, and it was growing less and less far away with every minute. At first he thought it was the clawed creature coming back to get him, but as it got closer he could see that it was much bigger than a dirt clod. A short while passed before Horborg could make out the shape. It was a piece of land with a little red-roofed house on it. Isn't that where Willie Trombone is? There was a big robot and a little being on it. Horborg realized that these folks would pass him if he did not act quickly, so he took off his belt from around his waist and made a lasso. He figured that it still was not long enough to reach this passing landmass, so in an act of desperation, he gouged a chunk of his chest out and rolled it into a great snake that extended the end of his belt. This contraption was long enough to lasso the land, which halted when the cord went taut. The big robot pointed to Horborg's chest and said, "Me Bill, me Bill." Horborg waved and answered, "Me Horborg, I am Horborg." The smaller being, slightly smaller than Horborg, but 1/5 the size of Bill, pointed to Horborg's chest and said, "Me think him's pointing your torso. Big ouch." Horborg had not realized that his guts were oozing. God. Out of a large fissure he had created in his chest. "Good, Quarter. What am I going to do?" The small being took off. Okay, there's one of the first typos. The small being took of his own belt, took off, so there should be an extra F. Took off his own belt and instructed Bill to carry him down to where Horborg was. I don't think Bill's a typo. Normally Bill has 2 L's in it for the name, but I think it's meant to have 1. Okay, so the being jumped into Bill's hand and he walked over to where Horborg sat, about to pass out. "Me, Willie," the stranger said as he tied his belt over Horborg's chest, clamping the severed sections together and closing up the self-inflicted injury. Horborg placed his hand on Willie's shoulder. "Hello, Willie, I'm Horborg, and you just saved my life." Willie did not seem to acknowledge this statement. Horborg figured Willie was not altogether sane, but he was grateful just the same. After a few days of rest, Horborg decided it was best to continue on his journey. Horborg asked Bill and Willie if they wanted to join him. Bill just said, "Me Bill, me Bill." And Willie mumbled a bunch of off gibberish to himself. Hoborg liked their company, but he figured that they did not want to come along, so he tearfully said goodbye. Hoborg was surprised to find that when he walked, Bill and Willie followed him. Hoborg did not question them. He just grew happy inside and continued toward the clay. So Hoborg's got a couple of buddies now. Bill, a robot, and then little Willie trombone. Big robot Bill, Hoborg, found out his full name because he was engraved on the back of his foot. Okay. Proved most useful for carrying Willie and Hoborg. Okay, so he carried them around. And the little red-roofed house over canyons too steep to climb. Hoborg noticed while being carried by Big Robot Bill, that Bill's chest had a switch inside it marked good at the present setting and bad on the other setting. Hoborg dared not find out what the bad setting did, but he thought it must be a poorly thought out attempt at dealing with the same problems he had when he was planning the making of beings that were capable of doing right and wrong. So just a good and bad setting, or a right and wrong setting. Do you want the robot to do good things because you're a good person, or do you want him to do bad things because you're a bad person? Take a sip of drink. Within a few more years, the three made it to the clay. It was a mountain of the purest clay in the known universe, and Hoborg found it to be of higher quality than even he or even Quarter imagined it to be. He filled his crown up with a few good-sized hunks of clay. Bill and Willie carried a few hunks to help. Altogether, Hoborg figured there was enough to make his overhood and about 2,000 beings. On the way back to where Hoborg started his journey, a tick burger came upon the trio. A tick burger is something all icky and sticky that Quarter always said to run away from. Hoborg yelled for Bill to grab Willie and himself and make a run for it. A tick burger is made to want what other beings have. He could tell that they had a bunch of clay, so he licked his lips, exposed his fangs, and said, "Clay." As fast as Bill could run, it was not fast enough to outrun the nimble tick burger. The ID panel on the back of Bill's foot was removed with one swipe of the tick burger's razor-sharp claw. Hoborg saw that Bill was slowing down and that they would soon perish if they did not do something quick. Hoborg threw all of the spare clay over to the ground below. He figured the amount remaining would still be enough to make a medium-sized world and about 500 beings. The problem was that as soon as Hoborg dumped the clay, Tickerburger gobbled it up, and it was still closing in on Bill. They tossed it over, thinking it would shed some weight and let them move faster. Hoborg nervously threw some more clay out, and this time Tickleburger ate it, but slowed down considerably. This was not good enough, since Bill also was slowing down considerably from the exhausting pace. He simply could not carry on much longer. Hoborg decided that he would have to be carried. Let me start that over. Hoborg decided that he would have to be happy with about 20 beings in a small neighborhood as a world. With that, he dumped most of his clay over with just a little left for his greatly reduced plans. It worked this time, since Tickerburger stopped completely and could not follow them since he was stuffed with so much clay. Bill continued under Hoborg's guidance, holding the little red-roofed house on his shoulder, where Willie and Hoborg could ride and room together. After many years' journey, Hoborg returned and was ready to build the Everhood. So not the Overhood anymore, but the Everhood. Where what you can do EverQuests. Is that where the EverQuest takes place? Is in the Everhood? A neighborhood that would last forever. So long as nothing went wrong, of course. Okay, that was the last one of that, right? Next screen. Okay, look at that. So this is getting the names mixed up. This is the robot. He's given him this little bear as a gift for the help. Pretty cool. It's a little teddy bear. You can't click on these and really get anything. You can just see it. So this essentially puts us, like, I guess, midway maybe in the Hall of Records. Oops. Okay. So this we're going to be reading about Arven next. So I've been doing essentially all of these videos in just one take, back to back. I'm just chopping them up in 30-minute parts, but I'm not really taking time in between these. I'm just trying to get this all read myself in kind of one sitting. Take another sip of drink. This does kill your voice. Okay. So we will stop here. Clayman's tired of hearing me talk at this point. So I'll stop here, and I thank you very much, and I will see you in the next part. Bye.